Hello there, my people. Welcome to the Breakdown Panel. We're back with fresh takes on the big stories shaping our world right now. First up, Ghana is making headlines for joining the list of African countries that have accepted U.S. deportees. They said they are all West Africans, and they did it not for any reward or compensation, but in the name of humanitarian principle and Pan-African solidarity. However, that has not stopped the criticism. And the story doesn't even end there. Okay, the first 11 deportees are now suing Ghana over what they call illegal detention. So what does this mean? And was this truly the right move from Ghana? Second, the African Union is floating around a bold new idea, a continent-wide mining coalition. Could Africa finally unite to control its mineral wealth and set its own terms? Or is this just another lofty dream that might fall flat, as we often see? And finally, the world's spotlight is turning to New York next week for the UN General Assembly, with African heads of state in town at a moment of trade wars, tariffs, deportations, and shifting global alliances. What should Africa demand on the world stage? And what's truly at stake? I've got my panel here with me. It's going to be a powerful conversation. And as always, this is not just our conversation, it's yours too. So please jump into it in the comments. Let us know your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe so you don't miss another episode from us. All right, now let's get into it. Let's welcome back our panelists for today. We have Mylin Kin, political and social commentator, Ni Sarpe Intre, researcher on African geopolitics. Today, unfortunately, Fanta had an emergency and couldn't join us. We will miss her, but fellas, you will be holding down the front today. Welcome back. How are you doing?
Doing good.
I'm fine. Sandra, how are you doing?
Good.
Mylin, how are you doing?
Doing great. Hanging in here.
So, I'd like to start. You know, we're in a level of solidarity with the matching shirt colors, unplanned, right? So hopefully we can stay that course with our topics.
One can only hope.
Let's hope and see. It's going to be an interesting conversation today.
Yeah.
But so I want to start with last week, right? We went deep on Africa's path to real sovereignty. Ethiopia's self-funded dam, the AES Bank's bold vision, and the untapped power of the diaspora. We really went into it. And the audience had a lot to say. So before we dive into today's topics, is there a comment from last week that caught your attention that you want to sound off on? Nee, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think the conversation on what the diaspora can do was intriguing for a lot of people in our comment section, and I saw a few comments that basically expressed enthusiasm towards contributing to Africa, and I do hope that some of these things would be given more space and more room to basically sort of calcify. I mean, become concrete measures. In Ghana, there are very practical steps to invite people from the diaspora to both live and invest in Ghanaian communities. It's not gone without problems, I should say. It's not gone without problems. But I do feel that our continent would also have to do a lot of experimentation. I think some of the comments basically pointed to that direction, that a lot of these things would be experimentation to see what is the best sort of model or the best ways in which the African diaspora, at least those willing to identify with the continent, how best they can help the continent. And I like the fact that people are looking at it in the spirit of experimentation, because some of these things do not have a template, right? And so I like that. And comments, a few comments that I saw were suggestive of that.
Okay, Mylin, what about you?
Well, for me, what I saw in the comments was a lot of enthusiasm, that people are actually excited that these things have more potential than not. Like we talked about the building of the dam. Sure, the time frame, you can always question the time frame, but just to say that we got it accomplished, and we also noticed a lot of people saying they wouldn't mind contributing.
Right.
Like, and that was the one I think for me that stood out the most, because people, you don't know where people are in their walks of life, and
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
willing to contribute, to give, to see the betterment of their own continent. That encouraged me. Like I said, I speak from the perspective of an African who's been here since they're so young, and they want to connect with it more than just for a vacation aspect.
Yeah.
So hearing
Yeah.
people talk about that is like, hey, I want to contribute so I can go back. It made me feel good, and it encourages me. And I was even talking to some of my friends offline. They're like, look, man, if Africa is a segue for us to go learn our home, do things in our home, and come back here, why not?
Yeah.
People are
Yeah.
interested. They just need legit framework.
They need frameworks. They need a channel.
Yes.
They need a channel. And that's what, for me, that's what's exciting about the conversations that we're having, right? Because it's allowing us to, it's free survey for our governments, right? And we hope that they are listening and paying attention. And I do agree that was a really big takeaway, and really encouraging too, to know that we're in a time where the African diaspora and allies too, because it's not just, people of African descent, but there are a lot of people who see themselves as, part of the solution, and to those people, you are critical to, to the solution. And it's exciting to also see your energy and commitment, and passion for, for Africa and the greater, black world, as I like to call it. So, I really hope that we can take some of these ideas to actualization, because there's tremendous potential there. Great. So thanks for sounding off of that. Now, let's turn to this week's discussion, right? So, Ghana recently joined 4 African countries, Rwanda, Uganda, Eswatini, and South Sudan, who are on record for accepting U.S. deportees as part of Trump's third country deportation program. Now, Ghana's justification is that they only agreed to accept West African migrants. So they're framing it as a humanitarian and Pan-African solidarity, right? Or so to speak. Essentially, what they're saying is they wanted to provide refuge for African immigrants who are trapped in detention centers in the U.S. and may be suffering physically and psychologically with no way to return home. Okay, that's how Ghana frames this. But here's a twist. The deportees, all 11 of them, according to the BBC, are now suing Ghana for illegal detention. So it raises a lot of questions, right? Can you really say you're helping someone if they don't want the help? And this is a really big one because it touches on sovereignty, human rights, as well as the balance of power between Africa and the West. So I'm eager to hear your thoughts. And let's start with me, right? Were you surprised by Ghana's decision to take in U.S. deportees? Number one, even if they say that they're all West Africans and this was our basis for doing that, so were you still surprised by that decision?
No. And so I think we had this conversation for the first time 2 weeks ago, and my point in that conversation was that African countries are responding to something that is a reflection of global north, global south relationship, right? So individual countries are operating foreign policies that they feel are adequate responses to how a superpower acts, and that the best way forward would be to have a global south solidarity response. And so I'm not surprised that countries feel the need to do what's best for them. Indeed, at the press conference that John Mahama, president of Ghana, announced what the understanding was with the Americans, he did. He was actually asked if this is also Ghana's way of finding a very good situation with Americans, because the relationship between the Americans and the Ghanaians have been fractured by, I mean, as with America and more than 100 other places, it's been fractured by American tariffs and American positioning as a result of the Trump administration's foreign policy or foreign policies. And so Mr. John Mahama did say that yes, Ghana was looking to have a softer relationship, a relationship that is not marred by tariffs and
Visa
marred
bans.
by other sort of punitive instruments by the Americans or from the Americans. But I want to look at why Ghana's response, or at least Ghana's explanation for doing this, is something to be applauded. The Ghanaian Foreign Minister Kujato Ablakwa mentioned that it is important to look at all of this in an African context, right? And that is what some of us have been saying, and that is what you remember that I said, that it's important to look at all of this in an African context, because if you just have isolated responses to great power pressure, you are going to collapse. And so it is important for African countries to look at this as an opportunity for them to rally around common position. And Ghana's position, as was argued by both the president and the foreign minister, was that we were a Pan-African leader. We're the second country south of the Sahara. People usually say it's first, but Ghana is the second, because Sudan became independent in 1956, Ghana 1957. But then as a Pan-African leader, you actually need to lead by example. You need to lead by not just example, but also with a sort of foreign policy that invites people to look beyond what I feel is usually the nationalistic responses to some of these things. We need to go beyond it, because a nationalist response to great power pressure will not yield. It will not yield. So I like the fact that Ghana's response is basically on the foundations of Pan-African humanitarianism.
What I'll say about when it comes to deportations is that deportations are very multi-layered, right? The big thing that America has been doing with deportations are they're getting people who actually have protections in place,
right,
and sending them rather rapidly. And it's an unfortunate space that we're in, because now when you leave America in that expedited space, the speed to come back to America is totally slow. So
or not even there, right? And that's a really good point that you bring up, and it's important, Mylan, not to cut you off, but I think you made a really good point, because the reason why these 11 deportees are suing, Ghana, is there was an article in the New York Times yesterday about this the suit. And the U.S. government is saying, we agree that maybe this is not the best route, but once the country accepts the deportees, it's out of our control.
And then they put it on the country.
They put it on the country.
And that's where I would say, last night, I know it didn't come across as a joke when I was reading and said, hey, they said it's for Pan. But the truth of the matter is, it's like you can't cover like circumventing the law and looking at the actual protections when it comes to deportations.
Yeah.
And I feel like while I get the gist of what Ghana and the government is saying, the dangers behind that is they're not doing enough homework prior to taking in some of these deportees, because we're talking, we don't know, some of these folks could be permanent residents. So and this is where it sets a very shaky precedent for I think for other countries to be involved with this.
Yeah.
Because you're not getting financial gain, you're not getting any of that. It's setting a very shaky precedent because, as we know, in the big continent of Africa, coming to the States is a big thing. And you can get over here, get caught up on something, and have the right provisions. I mean, look at what happened in Georgia with all of the folks from Hyundai.
Yeah.
So that's a very slippery slope. And I respect the Ghanaian president's stance on what he is saying, but then when you start doing some of the homework, some of the people are like, "Look, we had provisions and protections. How do you know where it's not a politically asylum-based thing?"
Right. Which is the argument too for some of the deportees. Many of them are saying we were escaping, persecution. We're afraid that when we return to our countries, we'll be killed. So there's a lot that's at play here, right? And I want to get back to Neem, because to your point, you're saying that this is a Pan-African resolution, right? But is it really, if Ghana did not consult the countries where these deportees are from, right? They are 9 from Nigeria, 9 from Gambia. One of the questions that a lot of people are asking is, why didn't they just send them to Nigeria or Gambia, right? Why is Ghana acting as the middleman? And is it okay for Ghana to take on that responsibility and that burden? Right now they're being sued, right? So how do you look at all those challenges that come with, this decision?
All right, sure. So it's not yet a Pan-African resolution, right? It's not yet. I wish it was a Pan-African resolution, but it's not yet a Pan-African resolution. This is Ghana making the case that their response, or the Republic of Ghana's response, is one that is founded in Pan-Africanism. A Pan-African resolution would be, all of these countries coming together and basically responding to that. That being said, why didn't the countries take them? I'm sure that the Americans would have contacted the Gambians and the Gambian and the Nigerian governments in order to sort of return some of these people. I remember, I'm not trying to say that this is part the thing that sort of describes everyone's situation, but I remember that one of the reasons the Nigerians made for not accepting earlier deportees was because, and sorry, there's a sort of motorbike in the area, so so one of the reasons the Nigerians made was that these people were not wielding Nigerian passports. They didn't have Nigerian passports, although the American government was alleging that these are Nigerians, or at least the documents that allowed them to come to the United States in the first place were Nigerian passports, or was a Nigerian passport. They didn't have a passport with which they could return to Nigeria. And Nigeria was of the view that if you can't prove that these people are Nigerians, then we can't take them. This was an earlier case. I don't know if I'm sure some of our viewers would remember. In fact, Ghana did also push back earlier in the year on the same grounds. Ghana was accused as one of the countries whose citizens are most likely to overstay visas. And so when the Americans approached Ghana with the idea of deporting some people who the Americans alleged were Ghanaians, the Ghana government said if the American government can't prove that these people are Ghanaians, the Ghanaian government was under no compulsion to take them. And so that is actually one aspect of it. I don't know if the 14 who were deported to Ghana had this particular stories too. But then even with that, even if you put that aside, you can still make the case that Ghana's intentions are to be applauded, because what this actually represents is an opportunity for countries to sort of find a way in which they are going to respond to something that is basically, it's not just going to come from the United States, it's going to come from Europe as well, and who knows, maybe from some of the bigger Asian economies. It's migration, and every time when governments say they want to sort of take out certain people, is always a negotiation on national identity. What do I mean? It is not without, I mean, everyone can tell that the immigration clampdown is happening against people who look like you and I, or from brown majority countries. And I do understand, or I think people understand that within the United States, there is a negotiation on what American identity looks like. There is a negotiation, and there are, very, sometimes it takes a very, violent tone, but there is a negotiation on what American identity looks like. And so if this is what is happening in the United States, you can't, as someone who looks like, all of us here, you can't stand aloof. You can't stand unconcerned. You would need to rally whoever is involved or whoever has a stake in in the conversation. You need to rally all of us in order to have a sort of concerted response. And that is why I think the Ghanaian argument that we are doing this for people who look like us, aka Africans, is actually a very good thing. Because again, we can't talk about immigration without understanding.
Okay.
A second. We can't talk about immigration without accepting the fact that in a lot of these, in a lot of these global north countries, the clampdown on immigration, or the so-called immigration crisis, is actually a negotiation on their national identity.
But then what do you say about, what do you say, Mylene? I'll come to you and you can answer this as well. But what do you say about the fact that these people, and I'm not going to lie to you, right? Initially, when I heard the story, I agreed with you. My initial episode on this, I thought that was a good move from Ghana to accept, Africans back, to draw the line and say, hey, we'll take in deportees, but we're drawing the line. They have to be West Africans because they are the first African country to do that in their negotiation. But then when I heard that these deportees actually don't want to return home, they would rather remain detained in American cells. That kind of, Mylene.
Some of the rhetoric behind what they were contained and how they were contained. That they're saying that some of the holding conditions were worse than what they were experiencing in American cells.
Yeah.
And so, I go back to, I hear what you're saying, but the view that I look at it is, it's easy. Deportation is the umbrella word. What are the things that are under the deportation? Because this is I know this near and dear personally. I've watched someone get deported who was 85% documented, over an expired document. So it's important to understand the genesis of what do these deportees look like? What were they about? Because now that creates another level of future infighting that will happen in this country. Because you want to know why? This person will have left Ghana. They paid the government to do all their documents there. And the Ghanaian embassy at any country should know, hey, this person, they do have their documents. We need to advocate, so they need to stay there. It needs to be something. I think just receiving and taking people back without the full nuance is setting, I think it'll set any African country up for disaster in the future.
I understand your point, but it's not for the Ghanaian government to decide who legitimately resides in the U.S. It is for the American government to decide.
But I'm saying that
right?
Ghanaian government.
So it's not. So you're only as powerful as your response. And that's why I'm saying that it is important for global South countries to realize that the immigration crises that are happening in both Europe and North America, because Canada is also not to be left out in some of these conversations, is actually these countries reckoning with national identity. I remember saying something to a friend I made here, an older white lady, and I remember telling her this idea of multi-ethnic or multicultural national identity or situations is something that most West Africans will not complain about, because I come from a country that has about 50 ethnic groups. I come from a country where there are about 60 languages. Now you are going to ask, what does that got to do with immigration? It's got a lot to do with immigration, because my country already has an ideal of how to manage multi-ethnic or multicultural, multiracial societies. These countries are actually struggling, or at least there are certain people pushing a narrative that certain people do not belong.
I don't think it's a matter of struggle, because if we're honest, immigrants built America, right? So immigration is not new to America. So it is an ideological, issue as opposed to struggling.
True, but you just have to listen. You just have to listen to some people who are well placed right now, and I do not want to mention it, but you just need to listen to some people who are well placed, who want to stand by and fight for a certain view of America, or a certain historical narrative. And that actually it's in conflict with a liberal immigration policy, because then if they win with the narrative that you are pushing, you would also have to limit the kinds of people who you think didn't contribute to America. Do you understand what I mean? Yeah. If that narrative wins, then the idea that certain people did not or do not contribute to America would become AKA
the big
facts.
Thing for us,
and so African and global countries.
Finish your point.
Sorry. Right. So African and global South countries cannot relate or confront this issue as if it's just deportees and deportations. We need to understand the wider context in which the conversations on immigrations are placed. Right. It's placed in the wider context of national reckoning with identity, and that is why I would hope for a Pan-African response to some of these things. What do you guys
say about the fact that these people don't want to come home? I mean, it is they fear for their lives in returning home, and this is the real issue, right? Is yes, we can talk about a Pan-African response to but they don't want to come home. They don't have opportunities. They fear persecution. They fear all these things. So, how do we make our continent a place where people would say, yeah, I would rather return home than to be detained in American detention centers? How do we do that?
Well, I think, and that's the bigger picture here, is that you hit the nail on the head, is that folks are saying that there's not opportunity, because your willingness to stay detained in America versus willingness to be detained momentarily in Ghana and then sent to your native land, it speaks volumes. And it is about opportunity. It's about the probably educational system. It also could have been something political, So there's a variety of nuances that happens when deportations occur. So this now, I think, like I said, I do think the Pan-Africanism approach that the Ghanaian government is mentioning, it sounds good in theory, but what is a person getting deported for, and how can we reintroduce them? I think if Africa can establish something like that when people get deported and brought back, so where people aren't in a fear, because my personal belief is they'll try to find a way to get back to the U.S. somehow, some way. And I think Africa would start showing some type of reintroduction into the diaspora. So when you get deported, it's not a death sentence. It's a way of, okay, well, I'm back here. And God, somebody like me who left at the age of 2 got deported, I would sound just like these guys. America. But
anyway,
I just think there needs to be better tenets in place to reintroduce people back to the continent, to the diaspora, and that'll eliminate that. Because this looks bad for our own people to say, I don't want to go back to my own country.
I think you make a great point. Yeah,
Sandra,
you go for it.
I have a question for you guys. Is this any different from situations where people with people with varying degrees of experience working what would be ordinarily referred to as white collar jobs in Africa, leaving African countries and becoming, or sort of occupying certain roles here that are not necessarily white collar? Is this any different from it? Because again, people sort of negotiate their relationship with the new place they are going. They weigh the pros and cons, and they tell themselves, well, I was a banker back in Rwanda or Zambia, and maybe I'm a sweeper in the United States. But I prefer that because being a sweeper in the United States gives an opportunity to help maybe 10 extra family and friends in Zambia than actually being a banker in Zambia.
And I hear what you're saying, but this is why when folks do cross over, they come to America, they're fine taking those lower paying jobs because, look, I think all of us here sitting as Africans, all of our family members at some point had more prestigious positions back home, but they came here because of the potential of trajectory. So when we talk deportations, this is what I'm seeing, that those guys who are coming back, they're like, oh my God, there's no chance for me. I have to stay bottom of the barrel. And this is where, why it's important with panels like what we have here when we talk about the diaspora is how do we make it a destination? So when something like this occurs, because that does bother me that you're having Africans say, I don't want to go home.
Yeah. No, I think that's very sad. And I do like the what you brought up, Bailing, about the need for some sort of rehabilitation program, right? If we are going to accept our people back, and I do agree that a Pan-African response, right, would be ideal in this case. But if we're going to receive our people back, we want them to feel welcomed. We want to help them reintegrate with, society. We want them to see our continent as a place that they can return, they can work, they can grow, and whatever their needs are, do our best as Africans to meet them there. So some sort of a rehabilitation program that would help them, integrate back with society, I think would be helpful for our governments to consider, because this is, I mean, so far we have 5 African countries that have accepted these, these deals. Yeah. I expect that number to continue growing, right?
I think when financial incentives get involved, because look, I didn't want to jump into that effective immediately, but I know some level of financial incentive will happen. And when we say this, a rehab program, now it's case by case. But if we, and this is what I mean, if we're at the forefront of receiving, we're going to know why they were deported. But if we're going with these guys, and I didn't see too much information, just expired documentation, that's, to me, that's kind of, okay, now this person probably had a stable living here, probably was doing something. Now you send them back, and they're at ground zero all over again because they've lost connections. They've lost a variety of different things.
Yeah. So one of the things that Ghana said, and Nee brought up this point, Ghana, like many African nations, is under pressure, right, from Washington, from tariffs to visa bans to funding cuts. The list just goes on and on and on. Yeah. Now, officially, Ghana is saying that it did not get compensation, right, for accepting the deportees. But to Nee's point, it is clear that this was for some sort of political leverage, right, or political favor with Washington. So by insisting that it would only take deportees of African descent, right, did Ghana draw a smart diplomatic line here, or did it sell out its sovereignty, right, for favor with the U.S., as some people are saying? What's your take on that?
So my take on that is, I'll say that I think that it's good that they are specifically focusing on West Africans. They're specifically or not West Africans, just Africans in general.
Africans, yeah.
Because it's important that we do have a place to go back to. As we know, our history of dealing with the U.S., there is always a financial ramification or obligation that comes with it. So I don't see this as being done just to benefit, Ghana, or just to benefit. It's done because there's something that they'll get from it in the future. Hey, if you start taking these types of immigrants, we'll probably, that funding you were being messed with, you'll probably get some more, because that we knew the popularized ones at the top of the year, the African countries who were impacted. But I can rest assured there were more who just weren't as popularized that were impacted with funding. And I know these are some of the, and when I stress, I know I don't have 100% facts, but emotionally, I feel that there's discussions of, hey, what can we do to receive this funding back? We're here in America, and America's they're going through their visual and physical reshifting of what they want it to look like. And there's been a hard focus on the Latino side, but you can rest assured the Africans are somewhere in that pipeline next, specifically Africans. So America, they're putting all their ducks in a row. All of these countries are saying, look, we can house these people, but we're going to need this. So the sellout part to your question, that is where it comes in. That discussion has been had. We're just not privy to it yet. In more countries, as they see the financial benefits, I wouldn't be surprised.
But on the flip side too, right? On the flip, because clearly Ghana is trying to navigate a very difficult geopolitical landscape and power play, right? Nee pointed this out in the beginning. So if you're trying to navigate this terrain, and it's not easy for any leader right now, right? Especially African leaders, it's not easy. Do you think that what Ghana did to say, sure, we will take deportees, but only Africans, do you see that as sort of the way to negotiate in this terrain? Was that like the right way for Ghana to approach this difficult situation that it was in? Nee, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so again, all of my analysis on this particular issue, is linked to the fact that I need all foreign policy responses to be etched in Pan-African solidarity. I know it sounds like it's just going on and on and on about one particular thing, but I do feel that that is the only way you can have a response based in Pan-African solidarity. Is the only way you can have a bigger, better bargaining chip against a global superpower. And so any policy response that is at least pursuing Pan-African goals, for me, is the right thing to do. And that is why, as I would, if you think about it very well, what would have been the alternative? The alternative would be that these people may probably have ended up in one of the Latin American countries.
Yes, absolutely.
Exactly. And they'll be much farther from home than they would want. Okay, so again, kudos to the Ghanaian government for pursuing Pan-African goals. It may not be without problems. At least they are not being sued. The Ghanaian government is not being sued. It may not be without problems, but the first step is probably the most important. The first step and the intention to rally African countries into a concerted effort or a concerted response is the best step to take. And so, yes, I'm all for that.
Okay. Let's move on to our next topic. So the AU is calling for a continental mining coalition to control Africa's resources. They made the announcement at the Africa Climate Summit at Addis Ababa last week, saying that the coalition would be, quote, a vehicle for harnessing Africa's vast mineral wealth for climate resilient development. Now, at a time when superpowers like the US, China, and Russia are all trying to capitalize on the continent's natural resources, this could certainly be a game changer for the continent. So, Mylon, let's start with you. What do you think about this idea, this proposal? And is this finally the bold step that Africa needs to be taken right now to flip the script on exploitation?
Well, definitely it is a bold step. You see, so Africa's been involved in this for an extended period of time, right? China just happened to have been the unofficial silent partner because they've been there the longest. They actually have the majority share of taking our minerals, the resources. And Africa really needs to stand for themselves. You want to know why? Because China takes that, sells a majority of it to the US. So think about how many billions of dollars the continent is missing out on. Warranted, we don't have like certain infrastructures to process these things, but that's what this boils down to. And if my sister Fanta was here, she probably wouldn't be thrilled that the United Nations is even mentioning that, hey, this is what Africa needs to do. But I do think this is ideal for us, because if we're able to go to the table, and I'm all for this when it comes to negotiation, and speak to these countries from a position of leverage, because China does have that stronghold right now, and they are making the most money off of our backs. They sell to Russia, they sell to the US, they sell to India, all from everything they take from us. Why can't we be the face of that discussion? And Warranted, time is of the essence, and I know this will take time, but it has to start somewhere.
Okay, Nee, what about you? Do you think that this idea is feasible at all, or do you see it as just another lofty idea that is going to crumble under national rivalries and external pressure?
In defense of lofty ideas, in defense of lofty ideas, the fact that they are lofty shouldn't mean that they shouldn't be promised or even designed. So I would defend lofty ideas. But it's interesting that this is happening at this point, because I know that from the 26th of September, there's going to be a UN sort of on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. There's going to be a meeting of countries on mining. And I don't know if this is connected. I may have to check. But I always like, again, a collective and aggregated African response. I have three problems with this. Three problems. One is that the minerals of the future, so-called rare earth minerals, are not that rare. They're not that rare. That's the interesting thing. And so any African response to global demand for rare earth minerals would have to, first of all, prioritize national development, so that the mines from which these minerals come benefits the people within that country, within those communities. And then would also have to make sure that instability is not made even worse. And I feel some of these conversations do not address these two things, right? I remember being in Kinshasa for a similar conversation on the DRC's minerals, and there was a Polish delegation also that wanted to invest in the DRC. And there was also a Chinese contingent that wanted to invest in the DRC. And the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa was saying that if managed well, DRC's rare earth minerals could procure the country, if I'm not mistaken, something around $500 billion, right? That's a lot of money. That's actually about a quarter of the entire GDP of the African continent, the GDP of the entire African continent. That is if managed well. But very little was said about how to actually make the communities benefit from some of these things. Rather, what is talked about is special purpose vehicles. So governments go into agreements with investors, sometimes from outside the countries, and these investors provide both the technology as well as the capital. Well, technology is also capital, but they provide the capital to mine these things. And very little attention is paid to the communities from which these, minerals are mined. And so that is what I fear. My fear is that a lot of these conversations may not be responsive to the problems inherent in the communities that are actually giving you these minerals. Again, they are so-called minerals of the future, but the people from whom these minerals are mined will be left in the past. They'll be left in the past if we don't have.
So what's your solution? Do you have any solution or recommendations in mind? As we've been talking a lot about new models on the show, right? And we agree we need new frameworks, new models for so many things on our continent. So I'm curious if you've thought about what sort of new model would work for how we effectively leverage our resources, our minerals, especially in this context of forming some sort of coalition. What do you think would work best?
Yeah. One of the ways we can actually do this and hopefully do it better is to allow for community leadership, the community to actually lead some of these special purpose vehicles. Anytime governments and investors say they have a special purpose vehicle, basically what they mean is that they have this plan or this facility that will take monies from whoever, and that will take whatever sort of resource from whoever is willing to invest, and then this SPV gets the resources, markets, distributes, and some of the process or the supply chain where the resources are mined and then processed and then distributed, that supply chain omits the community. I would hope for communities to be very invested in that. Communities should sit at the table. Because again, you could be doing two things. You could be helping even ethnic rivalries if you make people understand that these things that are being mined in your communities will be beneficial to you. These things that are being mined in your communities would actually secure your future. There are lots of ethnic identities or ethnic groups in Africa that do not feel that the national power or the national executive or the state represents their aspirations. This is an opportunity for these ostracized or marginalized ethnic groups whose lands will be the places that these mining whatever will be done. This is an opportunity to actually put them in the national picture. Put them in the national picture.
This is where where I think the bigger picture comes in, right? Earlier we're talking about deportations and people coming back. Imagine if Africa has an infrastructure set up where deportees are coming back and you have these positions where there are jobs there. It creates a substantially different landscape. So for me, as I hear this, right, I think that point you brought up is very valid about underserved communities getting, that's the area where the mining happens. We've seen that here in America, but America's infrastructure is so different. When we look at oil lines, where it's so different that it's kind of swept under the rug. But in Africa, it will be a bigger outcry. So I think involving them to let them know, hey, this is what's coming, and you get the precipice of being the first people trained and educated on this. So now this becomes more of a generational thing, right? Let's say someone of your age, your stature, you're the first generation to do this. Then, you have a kid, you train the kid, and now it becomes African based. And it does make us, I don't want to say a superpower versus negotiating with other countries, but it puts us in a position to have a more sound discussion than a chaser discussion. And that's for me, as when you brought up that point, that's what I see. Yes, that conversation is very important because that is something we don't formally touch on. But I do agree. Once that's established, and that's what this panel represents, is we're talking about the diaspora and how can we formulate a new way. Talk to these underserved areas, have them invested in being part of the process. Because once people have a physical framework, and I don't care what continent you're on, you will buy into it and you will go forward. So I think this needs to happen.
Yeah. So how could that model, right? If you were advising the AU right now on this new idea, I think you're both agreeing that it's a great concept, it's a great proposal, but it has to be done differently. How do they integrate this, model that you're both agreeing that needs to be a part of it? How do they successfully integrate that into this idea?
I'll come shortly to that, but then there's always the threat, or there's always the threat. I think that's the right word. That new resources or resource extraction may even go on to worsen inequalities. Because, all you need to do is to point to the galamsey. And I don't know whether Mylan, you know what is happening in Ghana. It's there's a spate of illegal mining in Ghana called Galamsey. Galamsey. It's illegal gold mining, and usually what happens is that it's people with money who go into these communities, exploit these communities, and so it's the rich getting richer, right? So there's always the threat that resource extraction can only go further to deepen inequalities.
Yeah.
It may go further to deepen inequality, and that is why I'm advocating for community-led initiatives in mining. Obviously, we need to think about sustainability because we you know, as we grow our material production, the earth is also negatively responding to human actions, and so we need to also have that in mind. There are communities that have fallen foul of the repercussions of climate change, of climate catastrophe, and those communities would also need attention. They would need as much investment as possible. But that conversation is even connected to global climate financing and whether we could get the monies that are due us. I remember that Africa contributes just about I think it's under 5% of global emissions, but we start to see the African start to the Africa stands to, and we also have an outsized solution because the peatlands of the Congos absorb a lot of these emissions, right? The peatlands, the Congo Basin area absorbs a lot of emissions. Yet African communities in these places have yet to recoup, you know, what their environment gives to the world. But let me just say what the AU. Okay. Let me just say what the AU can do.
Let him make his point, and you can jump in.
So for the AU, I mean, my feeling with the AU is that AU is intentionally weak, and the AU is intentionally weak. Yeah, it's intentionally weak because African heads of state want the AU to be weak because what they fear is what Europe has. The European Union having this supranational, going above national government and having a mandate that is enforceable within countries. African leaders don't want that. African ruling classes everywhere don't want that. They don't want someone in Addis Ababa, you know, the headquarters of the AU, to tell them, you know what, you need to actually do this. You need to actually do this human rights thing, do this environmental thing. No, they don't want that. They want to be kings of their villages. They want to be kings of their jurisdiction. So the AU is weak by design, and African leaders intentionally did that. Until they can actually do any sort of progressive modifications. I think we'll be crawling. But in the meantime, you can appeal to their West interest. Their West interest being money. You can appeal to their West interest by telling them that or by having a sort of a coalition of pressure activities across the continent that can force them into implementing some of these solutions that will be, or proposals that will be put forward. I don't know how far we'll go with that, but I do think it's a lever worth pushing, like pressure on governments to actually respond to the needs of communities from whom minerals are mined, also communities who suffer the brunt of mineral extraction. These things would only happen if people within the countries themselves, you know, put pressure on the government.
Okay. Mylan,
what I hear is, you know, from what you're saying, Nee, I hear a lot of opportunity, right? We have the resources. We need certain parts of infrastructure to be set up. So it's not like a single pronged thing. So if we're going in there to mine, we're going to need to have these investors come in and really invest in the continent, invest in those areas. So the investments, while not all of it will be monetary, a lot of it will be education. A lot of it will be training. I do agree African heads of state may be weak. I don't want to speak on a matter of fact because I'd say I'm the least experienced on that. But what I'll say is they may be. But ultimately, as the country starts to transition and to progress, their thinking will have to align and match with it. I think where I agree with you on certain points, Annie, but where I think we have a philosophical difference is you tend to focus a little bit more on the what could go wrong, whereas for me, I am from the standpoint of we have to make the attempt and understand where the failures happen, because failures inevitably will happen in every facet in anything you try. We understand the longstanding history of African leaders, and you're right, kings of the village. Look, geez, I'm from Liberia. We have $100 million missing that we could never trace, right? So it's something where
I speak on behalf of all Ghanaians and Nigerians. Just $100 million. That's all.
Oh my God!
And I'm speaking on behalf of all Nigerians and Ghanaians. It's like this De Franco meme. Is this your first time being hanged? Is this really your first time? Anyway.
That's what I'm saying is they are weak. They are, they want to stay kings of the village. But ultimately, I'm from the belief that the more that eyes are getting onto the continent, more educated Africans are going over there. I would urge you to look like even someone as yourself who's highly educated. You are going to go over there with parameters and expectations of what needs to be put in place. And I wish that's something you could convey to us here to let us know that, hey, I get what you're saying about hey, this could go wrong, but a little less of that and more of this is what we should put in place, step one, step two. Because for me, if I hear the opportunity, I want to understand how can we, and when I say exploit, not in the negative context, but exploit it for the betterment of our continent and for our country.
Mm-hmm. Community-led ventures on recouping the best that mining can give people. Community-led ventures or vehicles are in essence not capitalistic, and so it goes back to why I am a critique of capitalism, because I do feel that it's again putting into the hands of people who say they are just structuring special purpose vehicles and they are investors. You go back, you have this vicious cycle where those with money invest in the infrastructure or the technology to mine, and then they recoup, and it's just a vicious cycle. But then if it's a community-led proposal, it is prosperity that is horizontal, not vertical. Right. So, and that is what I would hope to see.
We need to reach out to the AU and consult for them for free on this matter. How about that?
The AU has a relationship with the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, which is basically the AU's think tank, right? So most of the AU's conclusions on a lot of these things come from the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Yeah. So they do have big minds. I guess that's what I'm saying. They do have very well-educated people. Again, it's just the way we've done stuff. We've always done stuff in pursuance of profit and capital, and so when you do that, you repeat a vicious cycle, and it's just sad.
And to me, who's getting more acclimated, I'm going to tell you the big issue that I have, and this isn't specific to Ghana. This is specific to Africa. Is Africa's forward thinking is too historically based. Like it's the guarantee is December 31st. This year is done. They tend to stay. The continent as a whole tends to stay very historical, very what it used to be. How
we're not introducing innovative thinking and solutions.
Such a big continent. Because I'm enamored by like China, Japan, and how you look at how they are always evolving, how there's always a change. And I'm like, I definitely know the brain power is in Africa too. Like this isn't like we have it. And for me, who's learning more about this week to week and on my own as we're doing this, that is the issue that I'm seeing with Africa. It's not enough forward leading mindsets. And that's why Traore, he is forward leaning. And like I said, I'm a big fan. And I hope that, I know how you feel, Nee. I'm a big fan. And this is something I would want to see to get maximized, even if he's not the one that carries it to the end. But if he puts provisions and things in place to show us this, because too much of Africa is starting to become historical rhetoric.
And I think when you think about how far behind we already are, right?
Exactly.
We need to leapfrog. And to leapfrog, we can't build solutions and build our future on the past and on what other people have done. To your point, we need innovative solutions to leapfrog into the future.
Yeah.
Excellent point. That was an excellent point. Okay, so let's move on now to our next topic. We're at a time. I promise you I will keep it at an hour today, and I'm not doing a good job. But so next week is a big week, right? All eyes are turning to New York as world leaders will gather for the UN General Assembly. Now, for Africa, it's coming at a critical moment. Their continent is being hit with new tariffs and visa restrictions and just pressure from the U.S. At the same time, Africa is home to some of the fastest growing economies, right? And its leaders are arriving with both challenges, but also leverage. So here's the big question, right? Will Africa show up at the UN just to make speeches again, as we see, or is it going to use this moment to set the global agenda? So from both of you, what do you think about this moment, and what would you like to see from our leaders at the UN next week?
Isn't this an unfair question that Africa is just about to just give speeches? Who else does anything more?
Oh, God.
No one does more. Yeah. No, I think it's unfair to say
we're being optimistic here. We're talking about building a new Africa, okay? We're talking about letting go of the historical way of doing things.
I understand. But the UN General Assembly has always provided a platform where countries' sworn foreign policies are never matched by the actions they take, because you can get a UN General Assembly resolution with about 20 countries that are, absent, or, they are silent on certain votes. But then after the General Assembly, they'll tell you, we condemn this, we condemn that, we are committed to humanitarian, blah, blah, blah. So African leaders are not the only ones that go there to actually talk. Everyone goes there to talk. Let's be fair. That being said, the African agenda has been pushed through various fora over the years. The non-alignment bloc within the UN, I think, has had, if I'm not mistaken, has 100 states, and it's one of those platforms that countries that have a non-alignment approach to international politics or foreign policy gather and advocate for respect of international law, advocate for sovereignty, advocate for all of these things. So Africa has always had a fora to push African agenda.
Right.
I don't think it's going to be any different come next week.
What would you like to see, right? Because yes, everyone makes speeches. Speeches are important because it lets us know what people are thinking.
For saying speeches are actually important, but actually, I would like to see more African countries be a lot more steadfast in condemning, what should be condemned. And I'm sure our listeners and viewers would know exactly what I mean. Stand on the side of history, where 20 years from now you can actually hold your shoulders up high and say, you said what needed to be said 20 years ago. I refuse an interpretation of strategic autonomy. I refuse an interpretation of non-alignment that basically fails to meet the moral moment, right? You don't sort of waddle between two things. And again, I guess I'm also going around the topic, but I'm sure our viewers understand exactly what I'm trying to say. Meet the movement, give moral clarity. Moral clarity is very important in international politics. I remember a conversation between two people on UK TV, and one was asked, what should we pursue? Should we pursue justice, or should we pursue the defense of an ally? And the one person said, well, we should actually defend our allies all the time. And then I just sat back behind the TV and I realized, well, there's justice. And then there's a defense of allyship, which is basically military cooperation and economic cooperation. And this person is arguing that that is more important than justice. Justice that is expressed in human rights and defense of humanity. I would hope African leaders actually have moral clarity in their speeches come next week.
Marlene, what do you
definitely. So I'm picking up what you're putting down, Nee, but I'll say this. I think it's important that within these speeches, presentation, that Africa is transitioning into being a valued business partner. And I will continue to drive the business aspect because as I'm learning more about our beautiful country, I just can't see it always being the giver and not the recipient. And I think that it's important that, you talk about the 20 years from now, someone can look 20 years and say, hey, even though that wasn't the conference necessarily for that, but they started beating that drum. Because these things happen year in, year out, year in, year out. We've all seen it. I've been in New York one time when it was happening. It just looked like a bunch of old stiff people who were just walking into the UN building. That's what it looked like. This stuff needs to have a relevance where when people come back and they're talking about it, there is something that makes sense. There are so many rules and discussions and things that are had there that when's the last time we've sat down and been like, oh, did you hear what they said at that last meeting? Nothing of context has come back.
Yeah.
When we were told about this, I started doing some homework. I was like, oh, shoot, they haven't really talked about anything of substance other than the same rhetoric. And for me, anytime
because the same things keep happening then. The same things keep happening.
No, and also I think it's because of the fact if you're viewing Africa as a whole as a continent where it's kind of like, yeah, this is what they'll take for now. We'll address it this way with them. They're not really pushing the envelope. That's what I think the transition needs to be. Africa needs to start pushing this forward to say, look, other than talking about these issues that you guys are bringing to the table, here are some issues that we're interested in discussing.
Right. Collectively, right? Collectively.
Yes. Discuss what they bring up, but we also have to start discussing our things because the last 7 years, in 7 years, if you can't rectify like people related issues, guess what that tells me? You're not trying to work on it. You're just having this summit now at some point just to say this is something it's what we do.
Yeah. I would have wished that before this meeting next week that our leaders would have had a private meeting themselves to say, here's how we're going in as Africa. We're going to be on the same page on A, B, and C. Yep. Here's how we want to partner with the US. Here's how we want to partner with Russia. Here's how we want to partner with China. This is our position as a continent, because in these times, you just can't stand alone.
Yeah.
And I think what is hurting us right now as a continent is that we're standing alone and negotiating, individually. And I would wish that as a continent, we would take this big stage as an opportunity to assert that we are united and that we claim our seat at the table and that we want to negotiate, we want to partner, but here are our terms, here are our conditions, here's how we want to make this a win-win for every ally and for every partner. That's my wish.
Yeah.
Are we going to see that? We'll just have to wait and see.
I already told you why African political classes or political elites do not want a strong supranational continental government.
Yeah,
because
we can only wish, right?
Yeah,
we can only wish.
They're invested in having, jurisdictions where that makes it easy for them to exert power and extract value. That's all. African political elites are not interested in strengthening continental government. At least I've not met anyone since Nkrumah and Nyerere. I didn't meet them, but the point I'm making is that I've not had interacted with the words and the works of people who basically reflected an aspiration that goes beyond, obsession with national identity and states. And I want to go further than that. My politics requires that I go further than nation states. So that's it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys. This has been a great conversation. Thank you again for pouring in and for all the passion and really, really great ideas and insights that you bring to the table. And to our viewers, we want to hear from you. We need you in the comments. Sound off on these discussions that we're having here. Let us know your thoughts. Add to the conversation, because you just never know who's watching, who's listening. And, thank you all for being a part of this community. Again, if you have not subscribed, remember, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and join our membership community. Let's continue to grow and lift our great continent, our diaspora communities everywhere, no matter where you are. We love you so much, and have a fantastic week ahead. Before we go, panelists, any final words from you?
Always look for the opportunity and maximize on it. That is what I will always stand on. If the opportunity presents itself and it can be beneficial, you have to go for it. And don't, things will go wrong, but don't always think about what's going to go wrong.
Talking about opportunities, there's an opportunity for moral clarity. There's an opportunity for global South countries to express an aspiration towards international justice. And that opportunity comes again next week. And I hope that opportunity doesn't go past these people who have a unique relationship with the global north that is not very, very equal. Yeah. And I hope that in pursuance of equality and justice, they do not miss this opportunity that is coming up next week. Again, everyone watching this knows exactly what the movement is and exactly what I'm talking about.
And we'll be watching things unfold next week, and we will be back on the breakdown panel next week to break it down and discuss it. And hopefully there will be some really great things that happen that we're super proud of. So we'll just watch and see.
We'll be looking.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. Have a great week. See you next week.
Take care.